go through what we will cover, and you'll see in more detail what we'll cover, but I'm also going to talk about what we're not going to cover. If you guys have been to a lot of these cybersecurity presentations and shows, you'll see what I call black magic, right? Somebody will do this impressive thing where it looks like something out of Vegas, where they bring somebody on stage and within a few minutes they've got all their credentials from just being close enough to their credit cards or wallets. I'm not that kind of guy, so you don't have to worry about that. You're safe with me. I might not be safe with you guys, but you're safe with me. The world I live in is compliance at the product security level for companies, and I've worked with almost any tech company you can name over the course of the last 15 years. I used to run the IT audit practice for EY for Silicon Valley, so I was at Google and Apple and Yahoo and some of those companies all in one day at times. So I've got a pretty diverse background in tech companies and the types of product software issues that come up, and especially as cybersecurity is becoming more relevant. So we're going to talk about why compliance matters. We're going to talk about who it matters to. So I'd like to get a little more information about you guys so I can understand what you want to get from this presentation. So question one, I want to know, what industry do you guys work in? How many of you are in software? I see a few hands. Interesting. Okay. How many of you are consultants? You work for the Big Four or some other? Okay. Got some. How many of you have worked for one of the consulting company at some point in your past? Wow, a lot of hands, a lot of hands. Okay, good. Hardware. How many of you work for companies that make equipment? All right, Anthony here. Government. How many of you in government? All right. How many of you in insurance or financial services? Wow, quite a lot. That's good. What about healthcare, biotech, medical? Also, wow, we got a great swath of, a lot of different. How about private small business? Do we have anybody that's in that sector? Okay. And then lastly, just anything else, something that would just be totally different. Okay. How many of you have worked in multiples of these? I saw a couple of you already raise your hand about consulting, so quite a few there. How many of you really crossed into a lot of different industries? Okay. Have you done some at the same time? When you're in consulting, sometimes you do. You know, you're meeting with a pharmaceutical company in the morning, and then in the afternoon you're at Salesforce. The next, you finish the evening, talking with the San Francisco Giants about their compliance issues. Very interesting. Question two. Again, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Let's have a little fun with this. Who do you really wish was speaking at this summit? Like who else, we'll say. We've had some great speakers this morning. Maybe the CEO of Amazon, Facebook, Uber, right? Yeah, the room would be a little bit fuller than this, I'm sure, if Bezos was standing up here instead of me. Hollywood celebrity, right? Maybe we'll get one of the Avengers to come and talk about cybersecurity. Everybody has an opinion these days on everything anyway. What if we had a political leader? What if Trump were here, right? Again, very interesting. What if we had Hillary? What if we had them both at the same time? That'd be kind of... And then North Korea, right? Cybersecurity, they're kind of getting big into this, right? What if we had the team lead on well, we're not going to name the company because everybody knows it, who they hacked a few years ago, pretty famous story. Maybe we get Dennis Rodman, right? He's their buddy, so we can get him to explain what's going on in the world of cybersecurity. About me, I'm going to say I bounced around my career, so we'll bounce some bullets in here. Right now, I'm the Principal Regulatory Compliance Advisor at GE, and I handle a lot of our risk and compliance, and like I said, we serve over 20,000 customers worldwide. I've had some interesting career shifts, if you will, along the way. I graduated college at a time when my first programming class, we had punch cards, so I'm dating myself. I've seen it all grow up. When we put in things that were predecessors to TCP/IP, and then TCP/IP became the standard protocol, and then the internet came out. So I've seen a big development of things over the course of my career, and I've had to shift gears in what I've done to make a living. And for some of you guys, I see some young people, you're probably going to do that. You might do it a lot more than I had to. I'm also an author, and believe it or not, this is not the first time I've spoken, maybe the last, who knows, but based on how you guys rate me today. I released a book last year. It's not a cybersecurity book, but you can check it out on Amazon. It's called Eternity. Leadership, I've been in different roles. I've actually been the head of a couple companies, and when I joined GE, I was the head of a company, but I really liked what GE was doing. So I was a consultant, and I had about 5 other clients when they invited me in to work with them, and then they just made me an offer to go full-time. It was really fun, and it's been the best couple of years of my life. I really like the company culture and what we're doing, and if you guys are following GE, since they hired me, our stocks dropped from 33 to 9, so I don't know if GE's got favorable things to say about me, but I'm hoping I'm not the cause of that. And again, some of the companies I've worked for, I've already mentioned EY. I worked at IBM. In the 90s, I was international paper in the pulp and paper industry, and got into SAP and Oracle and things like that. So that's a culmination. But the thing that's real fun to me is the kind of clients that I've had a chance to work with over the years. Again, when it comes to technology, there's almost no company that people name that I haven't had a chance to walk into corporate headquarters and do some degree of advisory or consulting work. So let's go back to the topic, and building a proactive compliance program by enabling the first line of defense. I like MetricStream. They're wonderful. I speak, do a lot of webinars for them, but they're notorious for giving titles that are pretty lengthy, but you know, it's meaningful, right? Instead of a 2-word title that's a little vague, they give some pretty lengthy ones. So if they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, you know, sometimes the title feels like it's close to 1,000 words. Certainly can't make an acronym out of it. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about, there's 2 key words in that title, compliance and defense. So question number 1, who are we defending against? Are we defending against hackers and ransomware? Are we defending against customers, right to audit clause? That's a big one for me. That's, when you got 20,000 customers, imagine if 1% of our customers pushed the button and said, we want to come on site for a day or 2 this year and audit you, right? That's 200, and there's only, what, 240 working days in a year, roughly? We would just be gridlock, right? We cannot have that. So it's very important for us to have a framework that our customers trust and say, oh, okay, you know, now we sometimes still have to have a 30-minute phone call or even an hour with a big customer, a nuclear customer who wants to adopt our cloud product. We'll talk with them and reassure them, but we give them all that. But we have to manage that. It's a huge, huge issue for us. What about GDPR? How many of you in here have had to deal with that in the last couple of years? I see quite a few hands, so good. You can give me some expertise on it. I'm still trying to get my hands around that because with all the other things I'm doing, there's other people on my team who really built the expertise. The one that I have to deal with at a lot of companies I face is this guy, the CFO, right? So many companies make compliance feel like a tax on the business, right? You guys are a call center. We want to do everything we can to keep that to a minimum, and we don't see necessarily the value of what you do is we have to do this, right? We got to pay taxes. We got to have some tax people. We got to have accounting, right? But one thing I've seen that's really worked well for me and the companies I've seen that are successful is when you bring the organizational compliance into, I'd just say, the right space. And in my case, I do product security. We report to engineering, and just like product management and us, we're baked right into the process. So whenever they release a new version of the software or they're planning it, we're right there. So we're not some side organization 4,000 miles away that's just kind of monitoring. We're right there, in a lot of cases, a few, maybe 100 feet away from the engineering team that we need to meet with, and we can just walk over and talk to them. So that works well for us. But the answer to the question, who are we defending against, you know, truly it depends. It depends on what industry you're in, the size of your industry, the size of your customers. It also depends on the value you bring to the bad actors, right? I mean, if you're making little plastic glasses like this and stuff, you know, probably not a lot of risk and not a lot of money flowing that you're a high-risk target necessarily, right? But if you're making this guy, right, there's a whole bunch of stuff, right? You know, it'd be nice to steal the information that's flowing through these from the, how many billions of people are using these now? It's crazy. Second question, so first was how, you know, who are we defending against? Second is how can they impact us and what's the likelihood. And if anybody, how many of you do risk management to some degree? A lot of hands, a lot of hands. So isn't that kind of risk management in a nutshell, right? The key ingredients of risk management, impact and likelihood. So we go on here. Again, about GE Digital, more than 20,000 customers. We're serving industries such as automotive, nuclear, healthcare, and countless others. And we've gone through this technology evolution. As I talked about it early on, a lot of our software has been in use by companies for a long time. But they want new value. They want us to bring things to them. When say, if it's a pulp and paper mill, and they've got control systems out there that monitor the temperature, the pressure, and all those kind of things, and they want to bring that together in certain ways. I worked in the paper industry back in the 90s, and I remember we literally had to have the control center, you know, for different functions in the buildings where we made stuff, right? Because there was a physical limitation on the network and response times, and we had to have that. If we got to change that temperature by 2 degrees real quickly, you know, we got to have it, right? So I've seen that, but guess what? When you start to put a cloud layer on top of this to where all of a sudden anybody on the planet can now get into your control systems, right? It's a huge, huge risk if something goes wrong. So as GE's kind of migrated from on-prem, there we go, to we kind of started going into hybrid mode. And then most recently, as we go into SaaS, we now have custody of our customers' data in certain cases, and some of it's pretty sensitive. So the risk have gone way up to our customers, but the value has gone up extremely well. And we bring the ability for companies to get access to data and efficiencies that they never had before. Have you guys heard of IIoT, Industrial Internet of Things? GE's one of the major leaders in that. And if you look at probably the top 10 biggest deals on the planet of companies that are doing something, we're either winning those or we're in the middle of all those opportunities. We've won deals in the hundreds of millions of dollars, but most of our clients are, you know, are deals that are anywhere from 25,000 to about 3 million. Now, when it comes to product security, as I mentioned, I've worked with a ton of great companies, enterprise software companies, and what I find is a lot of them do what I call the minimum they have to get away with to satisfy their customers. Have you guys heard of penetration testing? Does everybody know what that means? How many of you know what a SOC 2 is? A lot of hands there too, right? But for a lot of companies, this is what they're doing, especially a venture-funded company. You got 100 employees, and now you're getting Fortune 500 clients, and they're saying, guys, you know, we're going to be putting some sensitive data into your stuff. You got to have these as a minimum. But just because you say SOC 2, you know, as a minimum, well, SOC 2 has, you know, potentially 100 or more things that you're looking at. So it means they're paying attention to the people who have access, the change control process. There's a lot of things you are doing if you're compliant with that. But with GE, the one thing I really love is we have to look at everything. We probably have a 17 threat vector approach instead of a 2-pronged approach of what we're doing. We're looking at threat modeling, the use of open source tools, not only from are those tools secure, but are those tools have license issues? Because if we're selling software that's open source, we run into some major issues with the potential license fees and things like that. So we have to pay attention to a lot of different angles on this. So let's go back to the topic, our short topic, if you will. So again, what angle will I take? Now, it's funny, I think Michael mentioned this earlier today about the projection of the impact of cybercrime reaching $6 trillion by 2021. So it's a big deal. But how many in here have worked for a company where you really were hit? You were either penalized or money was taken from you or something. You were financially impacted by cybercrime. How many people in here really were directly impacted? Yeah, that's a good point, Anthony. Who will admit it? Okay, and we probably need to be careful with that. Okay, so what angle will I take? Am I going to look at this from the world of corporate security or corporate fraud, kind of outsiders, insiders? Am I going to look at it from government oversight perspective? I'm going to touch on that a little bit, actually. What about the world of just kind of 24/7 monitoring, in and out, kind of insiders, outsiders? And then how many of you from California know what in and out is? best burgers on the West Coast. So anyway, I had to throw in kind of their color scheme and logo there. Product security compliance is where I'm going to focus on. But I'm not going to talk about consumer software. And by consumer software, I mean, say Yahoo, right? Yahoo, is generally selling software or giving it away in a certain way. Like, how many of you still use Yahoo email? I still have an account, but it's more for the junk stuff. Not to hold anything against them. I love Yahoo on certain things. But that's not the world we're going to go to. We're going to go to the world of enterprise software. And as businesses, we all use it, right? We all use some sorts of tools these days that were intended for thousands of users. The Salesforce products, Box, Dropbox, all these kind of things that we use. Little companies like Microsoft that we use some of their tools. And then we're also going to talk about best practices. So we're going to cover enterprise software and best practices. I'll do a time check here where we're at. We're in pretty good shape. Okay. For those of you who like to take pictures, this is kind of what I say is the first real meat. So I'm throwing everything up there so you can grab a good shot of that one. This is fairly prescriptive of stuff that you can walk away with, like, okay, this is what we need to think about. So I'll give you a second to do that. But so you can follow along where I'm at, I did manage to get a little bit of animation in here. We have trimmed the title back. If you notice at the top in green, it says Proactive Clients for Enterprise Software Companies. So that's the slice we're going to take. And again, I've looked at a lot of the other people and what they're presenting this week. I think by the time the Wednesday's done, you'll have seen product security, maybe covered from some other angles, but you're going to see the broader things. So again, I don't want to try and bite off things I don't have the ability to chew very well. I'd rather give you something that's real, because if you do work for a software company or companies that, you're using software, you're buying software, you're implementing, you'll understand the things that you need to deal with and what they need to deal with. So we look at the landscape. As you see the black headers here, these are organizational components, and how they all fit together and play a role in product security and the release of software products is very crucial. So engineering and product management, it starts out with us doing what we call secure by design. We have to think about security in release 1, not release 1.7 or whatever it is. And unfortunately, a lot of companies, we do kind of start releasing software, cloud software, that we don't bake that into the start. And then, have you ever heard the word technical debt? Yeah, I see a lot of heads nodding, right? That's the thing you want to avoid, because it's really painful to go back and clean that up, especially, and this is a case of a lot of companies, you end up in a hybrid model of cloud software where every customer has their own instance, right? So if you just release version 1 and you got 200 customers on it, now you realize you got a lot of software security issues. How many customers are ready to upgrade to 1.2, right? It's painful. But if you're a true SaaS multi-tenant type thing, where you can kind of slip it in behind the scenes, like, hey, yesterday we discovered an issue. Tonight we can fix it with engineering. Tomorrow we roll it out. The world hardly ever knew that anything was wrong, and then nobody knows if it was just a security plug that you did, then it didn't even affect the functionality of the product anyway, right? But that's a big part of what we pay attention to. And then the other thing that's really new, this came out with GDPR, privacy by design. That's a new concept that even we're dealing with. And how many people in software are focusing on privacy by design now? Is that also something? Okay, good. And by what we mean there is you really have to start thinking about the data. If we decide to take a software module that does something, and we're going to add something new that introduces some potential, we need to capture somebody's email address. We need to capture PII and stuff. We start to look at, are there ways to do this in a creative way to minimize how much data we need, and can we leverage it in some other way? I've helped some companies over the years who were dealing with credit card type data, and what we were able to do was to tokenize things in such a way that what they stored was just kind of a number that doesn't correlate to a credit card number directly. If you get this number ABC or 123 or whatever, I can't make sense of that. I don't know what somebody's credit card is, but somewhere behind the scenes, there's a database at the credit card company that's allowing me to map that, and it takes away a lot of the risk that goes with it. So privacy by design, secure by design, those are key elements. The other thing, and the reason I've got this in red, is your overall compliance strategy when you're making cloud software is so important to really bake into the process. To give you an idea, at GE, up until 5 years ago when we really started rolling out cloud software, we didn't even have a real formal cybersecurity compliance product team. We had security architects, and we had people in each product who could write hardening documents and secure deployment guides, and that was good enough because, again, our customers are putting it in their data centers just like they've been doing for 25 years. Wasn't a whole lot of new stuff. But when we said we're going into the cloud and we're going to have custody of customer data, we hired 100 people, just out of the blocks to do penetration testing with our own folks, to do advanced levels of cybersecurity testing in each release, secure deployment, all those kind of elements I was talking about, compliance, vulnerability management. We baked all that in because, again, the game changed radically for us and for our customers, but the opportunity also changed drastically as well. I mean, if you think about it, the 5 most valuable companies on the planet today weren't even on the radar of being valuable companies 12 years ago, right? You got Facebook, Amazon, Salesforce. I'm not sure if they're in the top 5 right now, but Facebook, Google, Apple, right? From what they do and how they're doing things, they're all new to the stack. So if you can do if you can do a platform that really fits the world's needs, you can go in a couple of years from a cool idea to worth, literally hundreds of millions of dollars in valuation. So that's where it's at, but it's also where the risk is, and that's where you can imagine companies like that are under constant threat of ransomware and stuff. They've got the money, and they'd love to, the bad guys would love to exploit it. So no matter how many times you go through a slide presentation and look at it, you still get a typo. So sorry about it. It should be risk management, but if you want to go with risk management, you can do that there at the bottom of the second stack of notes. But another real important part of all this, so engineering, product management, product security, it's really helpful if they are all under one umbrella like we are. We're all under engineering. So when engineering is making decisions about the products and what's going to sell into the world, to know that product security is baked right in, so is product management. We all work as a triangular effect. But these other important areas are legal, sourcing, sales, customer support. As I talked about earlier, customer contracts. It's very important that our sales ops teams and our legal and everybody's engaged because it's real easy for customers to slip in terms and conditions and salespeople to like, sure, yeah, we'll give you that, no problem. You can come audit us every year. You can come, and these things are very problematic. Making sure the call center's in the loop, right? You release new functions and features, make sure the call center people know how to take calls that customers might start calling about tomorrow when we release these things. And then our DevOps and TechOps, very important as well in how we do release management. Like I said, sometimes we have emergencies and we need stuff to go out now. We have things that are, we run Agile, but we do everything typically in 2-week sprint cycles. So there's stuff flowing through the pipes. And we have about 40-something products right now, core products, and then some sub-products underneath that. So there's a lot of moving parts. And for us to stay on top of the tool set and the framework of how you get something, a change in development through QA and rolled out to production, it's a pretty complex set of things. But when it's all set up properly, it's pretty amazing what you can do pretty quickly. All right, so let's spin a few more, and we'll move on to the next slide. Let's go back to you guys one more time. Question 3. So what compliance frameworks do you work with? SOC 2, Fedramp. Just raise your hands as I go through these. And ISO 27001, 9001. How many of you do a CSA star or even know what that is? We just added that recently. HIPAA, I think everybody knows what that is. Next, PCI. Wow, a lot of PCI. And then lastly, FDA. Some FDA, that's good. Question 2, we'll do a recheck. Who would you invite now that you're this far into my presentation? Who's your, anybody have a wish list of who they'd love to have here today? So let's have a little fun and put in a sports celebrity. And I thought it'd be nice to the city of Baltimore since they kind of hosted us. So that's their Super Bowl winning quarterback from a few years ago. Flacco, yeah. And I like Von Miller from Denver, too. Okay, so this one's going to be pretty important as well. There's a lot of meat here. So I'm going to kind of scroll through this, but then I'm going to circle back because if you're taking the pictures, there's meat in here, really good stuff. So I'm going to spend some time on this. We're at about, I think we got 14 minutes to go, including Q&A. So right now, you know, it's been kind of a one-way street here, but I do want to open up, and I want to actually know more about what you guys are doing too. But I'm going to try to save some time for questions as we go through this. But under compliance, what customers will require? We just talked about those frameworks, right? When we hit bullet point B, compliance maturity, that's a real big factor in the equation of the whole thing. How many of you would say you're kind of at the starting point for compliance? Is there anybody in here that's kind of like just, you know, you're working for a company and you're just starting to build it? So no hands there. How many of you would say you're, you know, kind of medium in the maturity level, that you're pretty far along? Okay, a lot of hands. How many would say you're real mature, but you're still trying to adapt to some new things coming at you? Is that some handfuls there too? I got a feeling too, though, the ones in the financial services, you know, you guys have had to do this for a while, so you have to be pretty far along with that. But it's real important as you go through this to really understand where am I in this and where do I need to be? What am I adding and where do I go? Also, how many of you use consulting firms to help you at certain times? Because audits and things like that, they typically happen annually for a lot of people. Sometimes if you're doing SOC 2s, some companies are doing those every 6 months and stuff. But there's times where a couple of years ago, ISO 27001 released a new version of a new standard, and you had like 3 years to comply with the new version. And sometimes those can be pretty significant. ISO 9001 came out with a new version, I think 2015. So we had to comply with it by 2018. So last year we decided, hey, let's get somebody who's gone through this a bunch of times, because the old standard and the new are pretty different. And we got to pass the audit this year, and we just want to make sure. So we bring in consulting firms when there's just certain opportunities. If we expand our scope, if we realize, hey, you know, we failed last year in how we're doing internal audits, let's bring somebody in with a better methodology perhaps than what we're doing. So these are the things we do. And then the auditors themselves, and this is a big one here, we talk about D1, is plan ahead. So when you're in cybersecurity auditing, there's only a handful of companies that do what I call the broad swath of all those kind of frameworks. On the left, you can find some companies that'll do Fedramp, but they don't do much of anything else in that stack. You'll find some that'll do 9001, but that's all they do. Some that do 27001, and that's all. And then some that only do SOC 2. So if you're going to be fine based on the nature of the data you have, and you don't see any reason to do anything more than a SOC 2 for the next few years, well, there's a whole lot more companies you can work with to do your audit. But if you're going to have to do all those things, you know, you're limited to, I can probably count on my hand the number of companies I know who can really serve all those and tie them all together. Because if at all possible, it's much better to have one auditor and maybe one consulting firm who helps you from time to time to really kind of refresh what you're doing or expand what you're doing. Now let's talk about the cost of compliance. So consulting firms, what I've seen, if you're building something new or you've been tasked with, let's add Fedramp, right? That's a big, big fish to put in a boat. To go out and get a consulting firm to help you do all the readiness for that, that can run maybe 2 to 5 times the cost of what the auditors are going to charge you for their role in Fedramp. So just so you kind of know how to budget that and what to expect. And then the external auditors, they can vary greatly in price. I mean, some of them, I'm not going to name names, but the more sophisticated ones that also do a lot of audits for, you know, Wall Street and companies that are public, they can be pretty pricey. And but we want to kind of go back to point D2. Make sure your customers will respect the auditors that you're going to pick, because if you are issuing these kind of certifications and attestations, it's not going to do much good if you're dealing with companies that want to see you know, one of the big four on the report, and they don't want to see a name of a company they've never heard, right? And I dealt with that recently where it was a company that had about 25 employees, but they had a great product, and a couple of in fact, they were really only able to target about 7 companies in the world. They were only applicable to the cell phone industry, right? And 5 of the cell phone companies said, we love what you do. This is what we've been waiting for, and we want to do it. And so when we approached them and said, you know, who's going to do the audit and stuff, and they told us who they had in mind, I said, you know, they're pretty expensive. And they said, yeah, but every one of them told us they have to. They're not even going to pay attention to our report if it's not one of the big 4. And they're like, okay, that makes sense, right? But, you know, again, you've only got 7 possible major companies in the world you can target to, and they're all going to pay you about $15, $20 million each. You're going to be doing $100 million in 3 years, and you're going to go from 25 employees to 500 in the next 3 years. Yeah, that all makes sense. It makes sense. So pay close attention to that. And then if you're small and you don't have that pressure of a big, you know, of needing to do an expensive company to do your audits, then don't. Because the one thing I learned a long time ago is if you're really small and you hire somebody who's mega, if they mess you up, who cares, right? It's not even going to hit the radar of their corporate executives, right? Like, oh, we got somebody over here who's not happy, right? So make sure you pick somebody that they kind of match up with you risk-wise. So if you're a 300-employee company, maybe hire a consulting firm that has 300 employees who can't afford to do, you know, for things to go wrong with your audit. The other thing I would say is when you're doing audit work, when you're buying software, I always say meet the parents, right? I mean, when I've helped companies before that were implementing Oracle and SAP, and you know we got on the radar of Larry Ellison. You know, it's like even though they were only spending several $1 million, but you know what? Because Larry knew that these guys were investing and believing in him and his products, he put his best people on there, his best professional services people, and he told them, I don't want to hear a complaint from this customer, right? So guess what? The implementation went really smoothly. So think about those kind of things as you go through it. You know, just because you think you're a small customer to a big fish, you're more important than you think you are. And if they don't care about you, then I would say that's a red flag. If they don't really want to deal with you, they think you're too small for them, maybe you are, and maybe you should move on to something else. So hopefully everybody got that. That, like I said, was one of the meatier things. This, I was going to kind of cover this if we have time. It's a little bit about assets and the components that go into this. But there's one point I really wanted to bring out. And a lot of companies now, because of the maturity of the world of technology, we're happy with one operating system. You know, we're using either Linux or we're using Windows. And maybe for the server side, we're using Linux, and then we're using Macs or whatever in the workplace, or PCs, right? You only got a couple choices. Accounting systems, a lot of companies have one accounting system, one desktop suite. But when it comes to security tools right now, the world of security is just so still growing and immature. A lot of us find that there's hundreds and hundreds of products we're using to do various little pieces. This guy filters our email. This guy makes sure that everything gets filed into spam. This one, you know, there's just so many components. And as a result, there's so many risk holes, right? It only takes one of those guys to let the bad guys in, right? So keep that in mind. And if you can, I think right now we're on an interesting ride to get to where there will be consolidation of security tools and companies, I think, over the next few years. But it is kind of a wild west. So that's one thing I would say. And then organizational structure of just kind of your leadership, the employees and the skill sets they have, the use of contractors, the use of consulting firms. So I'm going to go to the final thoughts and just kind of recap. So what is the front line of defense? Again, it still depends on your industry, your size, and the value you bring to the bad actors. Corporate security, it really boils down to the strategy, the leadership, the budget, and the skill sets that you have. And product security, which is kind of where I went a little bit in depth on, it's very similar core components, but extends to, again, as we talked about, engineering, product management, product security and compliance, legal sourcing, sales ops, customer support, DevOps, and tech ops. And then the final kind of point here, blending outstanding leaders, skilled practitioners, and consulting firms. And this is a little plug for MetricStream, but you know, Gartner's recognized them last year as one of the leaders in the world of GRC and compliance. But that's pretty much it. I want to open it up for you. If you do have Q&A and any thoughts that you have that I can answer. What, as you guys kind of wrap up a long, busy day here and stuff, any thoughts even just kind of on comments that were presented? Is there anything you saw there that you were surprised? Like, maybe I don't agree with those numbers, right? Anything like that. I'd love to get the feedback of that. I mean, these are pretty well researched types of things, but sometimes people see that like, that just doesn't sound quite right. One of the things, and again, if you're a software company that I worked a lot with the venture capital firms, and they were not really baking compliance in early enough in the process. And there's some very successful companies that have done well in spite of things, but when you start to go from a new product and getting adoption to what you call that bend in the curve, right? The big companies that are spending big dollars suddenly start buying into you. That's when you take off, right? That's when the company grows. That's when you get it. And if companies look and say, hey, you're not mature enough in the security framework and compliance, we're going to wait till you grow up. Well, if that inflection curve takes another 6 months, maybe even 18 months, I mean, I know one company out there that's doing really well right now. Their stock price is trading about $260, and they're worth, I think, $100 billion. But the belief is that if those guys had been about 2 years ahead on their compliance, they'd probably be worth 30% more than that, right? So they saved about $300,000 during that time, but it's cost them about $30 billion in where they could be in valuation. So as companies think about these decisions they make, the implications to shareholders and so forth can be astronomical. I'll quit talking. Let me give you guys a chance. So, any thoughts, guys? So, I got a question for you. Where are we supposed to go next? And there's another session, I think, in about 10 or 15 minutes, and then they've got kind of a dinner party and stuff. So, I heard there's a cruise tomorrow night, but unfortunately, I won't be able to stay. Anybody going to be able to make the cruise? A few. Good. Well, anyway, I really enjoyed having you here. Thank you. I hope you got something really useful out of it, some takeaways, and feel free, to connect with me if there's anything I can help you with at all. And I'd love to meet all of you if I had time. So I've already met a couple of you in here from earlier today or from my past, and it's good to see a few familiar faces as well. Thanks again, everyone.